Welcome to the Chiron Asteroid series with the June overview with astrologer Justin Crockett Elzie and myself, Elizabeth Liz Muschett. To get a hold of Justin, his email is justincrocketelzie.com. And that was his website, and his email is justin.elzie@gmail.com. And my website is alightpath.com. Welcome, Justin. Thanks for coming back and joining me again.
Yeah, Liz, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's kind of crazy weather around here, but I'm doing good.
I'm not complaining. I love the rain. I love the rain.
Well, and we can certainly use some more rain. That's fine.
Absolutely. So what are we talking? We're going to talk about Chiron today, right? And Hygeia.
Yes, yes. We're going to talk about Chiron and Hygeia and what they are in the chart.
Yes, in the relationship.
So I have a quote here on Chiron. Chiron represents the wound that cannot be healed by ordinary means, yet it is the source of our greatest healing abilities. And that quote is by astrologer Demetra George.
Can I?
And go
Oh,
ahead.
go. No, I was going to say something about this. One of the things that I think that that's a good keyword for Chiron is unconventionality. Unconventionality. Wherever it shows up in the chart is where we have to be unconventional. And I think this is when I read this, that's what I was thinking about, was that it's not ordinary, it's unconventional, and we have to attack it outside the status quo or norm, and how we deal with Chiron.
Right. And it's not only a wound, it's, also our greatest healing ability. So, or
Yeah,
what we can share with the world. So it's a
yeah, because
natural talent in some ways.
because Chiron was ultimately a teacher. He taught the arts, he taught philosophy, he taught music, and he taught the medicinal arts. So yeah, it's a skill. It's a skill, absolutely, of medical arts.
So we're going to do a little bit of background on Chiron. Chiron's classified as an asteroid, a centaur, a comet, and a minor planet. Discovered in 1977 on a photo plate by Charles Cowell. The orbit is 50.39 years. It's a large asteroid that orbits between Saturn and Uranus. And the classification has changed over the years. So in 77 was classified as an asteroid, and then in 1989 they found some of the behavior was like a comet. So it pretty much falls under all of them because everywhere I look, it keeps changing. So it's just like, to me, I'm going to accept all of them for now.
And so that would mean if the orbit is 50.39 years, all of us at some point in our life will have a Chiron return.
Yes, I had mine when I was 49 in a few months. Oops, I'm aging myself.
That's okay.
So, Chiron in astrology is known as the wounded healer, but as Justin and I have been talking, we're kind of thinking that, Chiron's way more than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Teacher, healer, shaman, because he was the teacher of the gods, one of the teacher of the gods. And what did you have here? Alchemy and what?
To embrace and face our personal wounds, transforming pain, fear, and suffering into healing, growth, and power, and sharing what we learned to assist and help others. But I also want to add to help and assist ourselves too. That I think is
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah. When we look at it, in particular signs, if a person has Chiron and Pisces, that's more, that can a lot of times mean more about mental health, because Pisces is the 12th house subconscious. So mental health and creativity, I've noticed when it's in Aries, like it is now, It's about the wound of self and being valued. And I've noticed if it's in Gemini, I've actually seen someone that has it in Gemini, and they're a speech therapist. And so that, so it plays out in, in each of these signs, how that wound can play out. What have you seen?
Well, yeah, I have it in Aquarius, and it's like I'm always trying to find my tribe, so to speak. So, and it's like I find people and they become kind of my second family instead of my birth
Hmm.
family. They become my family in a different way.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's how I use it.
Associating with people who value your uniqueness, as that a Chiron and Aquarius. Yeah.
So a little bit about the mythology. Um, a centaur, part horse and part man, the son of Titan Kronos, and his mother was a sea nymph living at the foot of Mount Pelion. Unlike other centaurs, he rose above his beastly nature, and he's known for his wisdom, knowledge of medicine, um, was credited with the discovery of botany, pharmacy, and the science of herbs and medicine. His stepfather Apollo taught him herbs, medicine, and archery. So he had a good foundation there, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, we all talk about Chiron being wounded. He was wounded by a poisoned arrow that was dipped in the blood of Hydra. He retreated to a cave to heal himself, but couldn't. He was in pain and couldn't die because of his immortality. And he traded his immortality with Prometheus because Prometheus was being punished for gifting humans fire. And Zeus honored Chiron's sacrifice and wisdom by allowing him to be placed among the stars for eternity.
That's why we see him in the constellation Sagittarius.
And then do you want to start with Hygeia?
Yeah, so Hygeia, it's asteroid number 10. It was discovered April 12th, 1849. It was actually discovered before Chiron, and it was discovered by Italian astronomer Annibale de Gasperi Parisi. And it orbits the sun between Mars and Jupiter, and its orbit is 2,000 or 30 days or 5.56 years. So it actually moves faster than Chiron.
Much faster.
Yes.
And it's interesting, the discoverer was 29 years old having their Saturn return. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty thing. So in astrology, Hygeia is the daughter of Asclepius, who was the god of medicine in Greek mythology. And we're going to definitely talk about that on one of our shows, hopefully. It's an asteroid which I have not seen any astrologers use, but I've been looking at it quite a bit, and I know you have to a little bit too. Um, she represents health, preventive health, hygiene, also whatever sign it is in, the health of that sign and themes around it. There is a stronger connection to emotional or mental health. And of course, there we have when it was discovered, which we've already covered. The mythology, she was the Greek goddess of health, hygiene, and preservation. That's how we got the word hygiene, through Latin. Physical health, patroness of mental health, daughter and chief attendant to Asclepius. She was actually, he was the god of medicine. So there's about cleanliness and preventive medicine. From an archetypal standpoint, if it's in a particular zodiac sign, it's about the health of that, the cleanliness of the health of how we express that particular zodiac sign. She had two sisters, Chiron and Remedy. And that's just a little bit of the mythology of Hygeia. And so one of the things that I was hoping we could cover with this is how, because these two asteroids have a 6-year cycle where they conjunct every 6 years. That's pretty much the core kernel of today, is that they conjunct every 6 years. And this is very important because that brings in a relationship, right? And but as I was starting to look at this, Liz, I was wondering what you thought about this. We could look at healing concepts by quadrant, and that fourth quadrant is prenatal, or the greater collective unconscious, if we have one of these asteroids in the fourth quadrant. If it's in the first quadrant, of course, it's postnatal, after birth, and it's an inner child healing. If we have one of these two asteroids there. Second quadrant, it's a one-to-one relationship, healing within the tribe, because that's where our family is in our childhood. And then the third quadrant is one-to-many relationship healing, because that's our relationship house. And our that's that area of the chart. I'm just curious what your thoughts were on this.
Well, I like what you came up with, but for those that don't know, we should probably explain what houses are in the different quadrants.
Okay, so the first quadrant is the first, second, and third house, which is self. Second house of values, possessions. Third house communications. And then the second quadrant is the fourth house of home, fifth house of childhood or children or fun, creativity. Sixth house is health. And then the third quadrant is the seventh house of relationships, eighth house of death, inheritance, and ninth house of higher education and foreign travel and publishing. And the fourth quadrant, the 10th house, is career, father. 11th house is community, social groups, and the 12th house is the subconscious. And so if we're looking at prenatal, that fourth quadrant can represent those last three trimesters of birth before the child's born. So I'm not sure if you have an example, but I've seen it where Chiron is in that fourth quadrant, and the wound actually happened before they were born, in an abstract way, and sometimes physical way. Could have been issues with pregnancy if they have Chiron in the fourth quadrant, the prenatal, or Hygeia.
Yes, I've seen that with clients that, there was something that either dramatic or traumatic happened while the mother was carrying the child, and that had an impact even though the child hadn't been born yet, but it still kind of carried a reverberation into their life on a certain level.
Right. Absolutely.
Because I had one client that had Chiron in the 10th, and no, it was the 11th. And the mother and father almost drowned because they were on a boat and it was sinking, and they were very, very scared. And it was, a very traumatic situation.
Was it in Pisces by any chance?
No, it wasn't, but but I get why you're asking.
Yeah, I got some good stories about Pisces and ocean stuff, that's for sure.
And then, the first house or the first quadrant is where we take our first breath, and that's where we're birthed into the world, so to speak.
Right. And 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 so with this relationship of these two asteroids, every human will have, within the first 6 years of birth, which in psychology, the first 7 years are the developmental years, every person will have or in a Hygeia Chiron conjunction within that first 6 years of birth. And so we look at what Hygeia is in the chart, where the Chiron's at, and how those are relating to one another. And we can sometimes see how that first wound is triggered by the first aspect that those two make. But what really is important is when the transiting Chiron and Hygeia have their first conjunction. And sometimes this is like 6 months after a person's born, or sometimes 4 years later, after, closer to that 6-year mark. And it's so telling. It informs us about a deeper understanding of a person's wound. I mean, if we just look at Chiron, I think we're missing half the story without looking at these other asteroids.
Well, and even if you're born with Chiron and Hygeia really close to each other or conjunct or even at the same degree, you're still going to have a return by the time you're 6 years old. So it's going to
Yeah,
reactivate and come back and want to
that's
look at
me.
that.
Conjunct to my chart. Yes, that's born with that. Yes, that's why we're talking about this.
Okay, so let's go to the next one. So the relationship of Chiron and Hygeia together, and we've been kind of talking about that, but do you want to go further into this?
Yeah, so we can look at them individually, but it's good to see them together because, um, as you pointed out in the slides, the Chiron is a wound, but then Hygeia can give us more of the emotional body or the emotions and mental health that surrounds the wound. Um, and then, of course, we want to pay attention if we're looking at a chart, whether that's if Chiron and Hygeia are in that fourth quadrant prenatal, as we're reading a client's chart, or do we want to see that they're postnatal, where should they happen in the the lower half of the chart? And then, of course, it's always important to kind of pay attention to that first aspect, whether it's a square, and sometimes they're born with them squared or sextile or opposition. You and I were just talking about a client today that has them in opposition, and so that's static. That's important. That first aspect, and then of course everybody will encounter the first conjunction of what I'm saying is the transiting Chiron and Hygeia. Um, and this is sort of if we talk about a trifecta, here's the natal Chiron, here's the Hygeia, and then the first conjunction kind of completes the puzzle or the picture, and how it could be the one point where there's that inflection point where there's an event that happens, which we're going to talk about a couple today, where it's actually when the conjunction happens is when the actual event happens that uh, activates that Chiron and Hygeia in the chart.
So to me, it seems like every 6 years we'd have a new opportunity to find some inner healing within ourselves to work on that. And by the time you're 50, when you have the Chiron return, you'd have 8 or 9 of those conjunctions. So you'd have a lot of opportunity to work
Yeah,
on that.
yeah, absolutely. And as you've printed out a report from Solar Fire, and just so people know, you can print out a report on this, right, of their conjunctions.
Yes, yes, because you can do a search and find out when those are happening. So that's always a good thing to know.
And one of the things I've noticed is what's great about this is if you look at the person's Hygeia and their Chiron, and then you count or look at the table and see when that first conjunction was and where it was in a chart, it leads to a deeper conversation with the client. This is where we can have that deeper conversation about what the wound is and how they can uh, come up with strategies to heal that of the Chiron.
Exactly. And, just the Hygeia informing the Chiron or the Chiron informing the Hygeia. I'm not sure which one is informing, but it's probably a two-way street. So they're both
Yeah,
informing
they
each other.
feed each other. Yeah, and they could be like three different signs. Like the Chiron is in one side and the Hygeia is one side, but you start to see a connection or how this happens, and then there's a domino effect. But then the inflection point, the conjunction
Conjunction.
happens, and another sign, and it all three fits together. It's this trifecta effect where it's like, that's the whole puzzle.
Well, in every 6 years, it's probably going to conjunct in different signs anyway because of how they're all moving. I mean, possibly you could have it be in the same sign a couple of times, but um,
Right.
depending on how fast Chiron's moving. But you're going to have a Hygeia return within every 6 years too to the exact sign it was in your natal chart too. So it's like
Absolutely. There you go. Yeah.
all
But
these layers.
right. What we're only talking about today, though, is the first conjunction. postnatal, because that is the important one. That's what kicks it off, or that's the inflection point, that first conjunction in the chart before age 6.
Okay, so let's look at some charts.
Yes. So this particular client has Hygeia in Leo in the first house. So actually, Hygeia was the first planetoid to rise right after they were born. And it is conjunct Juno, the wife of Jupiter here, which relates to marriage and relationship. Or so if it's in the first house, this is there's something here about the wound of self and the relationship with self that this person's learning, and it's in Leo. And then of course we see Chiron just below that in the second house, conjunct Mars in Leo. So this person was born with them pretty close together here. And what are your thoughts on this one, Liz?
Oh, well, that I would say, like, if this person was sitting in front of me and maybe they were younger, I would say that, taking care of their body is probably pretty important, with that Hygeia in the first house. Um, we could say, take good care of your heart. So, maybe gentle exercise or some form of exercise might be really good for them, versus being sedentary.
Yeah.
And then the Chiron in that second house, and it's still in the same sign of Leo. Um, so they're housemates and they're 17 degrees apart. So, I mean, that's a little bit far for um, a conjunction, but, it probably wasn't. Well, it would be a while until they made that conjunction after their birth. So they're applying to each other. So,
Yeah.
um, maybe.
Actually, yeah. So yeah, they're applying, and actually the conjunctions later this year. So this happened pretty early on. The conjunction here in a few minutes on the second chart. Um, so to tell you a little bit about this person, this person, right away was trying to um, fit into the family here per se and express their self authenticity. That Leo would step into that. But what happens is that in this family there was another sibling that was already there that was taking up most of the oxygen in the room, and so this child um, really had some issues with being noticed or recognized in the family early on, and hence why that Chiron and Mars together in Leo was sort of acting out in a performative way here there a little bit to try to get some attention. And so there's sort of this, I always say when people have Chiron or Hygeia in Leo, they're trying to find that self-authentic self and put that out to the world. And a lot of times they could hide something about themselves as they get older adults that they don't want other people to know. And so they're learning to step into their own uniqueness and their self-authenticity so that they can be more creative, because it's a creative aspect here. So do you want to bring in the first conjunction?
Sure.
So
Okay,
the
there we
first
go.
conjunction happens, that same year in August, um, in that second house. What do you think about that?
Well, their value system is being very challenged.
Yeah,
And, with Leo wants attention. So, and being such a young child, they need a lot of attention in our to form who we are. Those are our formative years when we're very young. And since for that would be this child was about 5 months, and so maybe was lacking a little bit of that attention that it needed.
yeah, yeah. And this could later on in life, I think it's a person that really has to step into their self-authentic self here and not worry about what other people think, and realize that they don't need other people's attention, and step into that and just put it out there. Be vulnerable,
Yes.
and so a person is really quite creative too. This person, and this person on the when we talk about it's the greatest strength, this person could really help people who have issues with self-esteem or their creativity. And this person understands when somebody's not noticed, recognized, or valued. Great life coach type of personality in some ways with this, or a person that can help people with their creativity.
Well, that's a great example. You ready to go on to the next one?
Yes, yeah, unless you have anything more with this.
I can't think of anything at the moment.
I did say, I think it was also important you pointed out the heart health, though, too, there.
Well, and it doesn't mean that they had a weak heart. It just means that, the energy in their body to fulfill their heart, perhaps, or just
Yeah.
exercise, to keep
Yep.
healthy.
Yeah. So this particular client, we see this client was born in March 1940, and so they're born with the Hygeia at 0 degrees Pisces in the 5th house of their childhood. And the Chiron is in Cancer, up near the top of the chart in the 9th house. So, any thoughts on this before I tell you the story?
Well, it's applying to a trine, so that would be their first aspect. So already we can see that there's going to be that aspect even before the conjunction. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure how fast that would happen, but it's going to happen. It has Hygeia has 14 degrees, but sometimes Hygeia goes retrograde. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah. So, um, I found it interesting that this Hygeia was at the 0 degrees Pisces in the 5th house, because that Piscean archetype of the creative child and imagination and fantasy, right off the bat here, we see a wound with that the childhood loses some sense of innocence and fun and imagination. Well, come to find out, this was an only child as well. So there again, we see the Chiron there. I mean, the Hygeia there in the 5th house. It was an only child, and they were pushed basically to be an adult sooner than they were supposed to. So there was sort of this loss of innocence, the wound at Hygeia and Pisces, 0 degrees, loss of innocence or wound of creativity, imagination in the childhood. And as you pointed out, that Chiron is actually trines that Piscean sun, and it was not a very nurturing environment either. So we can kind of see the juxtapose here: pushed to be an adult sooner, loss of innocence in childhood, and then the Chiron and Cancer
Can
there is not a very nurturing environment either. There's the wound of emotions within the family here. So that's where we start out with. And as you pointed out, there will be a trine here coming up, and so there's already an aspect before we ever see the first conjunction. And if you want to bring in the next one, which it brings in the first conjunction, which actually happens 3 years later now. So see, it can happen within that first 6 years. So 3 years later, we see this conjunction with Chiron and Hygeia and Leo in the 11th house of social groups and community. So I'm curious what you think about this, how this informs us of those natal asteroids.
Well, on some level, community would be important, but it could be that the community um, didn't pay attention to this person or expected them to do something different. Because even though it's not an exact aspect, that Hygeia is opposite Hygeia.
Yeah,
But
almost. Yeah,
so, before it made the conjunction, Hygeia was opposite Hygeia. So, it could have been reactivating even what was going on at the, from a child.
Yeah, good point. That Hygeia, transiting Hygeia, opposing natal Hygeia, even more so is sort of that um, um, bringing in guilt and seriousness and reality and a little bit harsher reality in the child's life. So this child, this conjunction in Leo, again we see Leo here. We used two examples of Leo here. This child was also in some ways stunted early on because of the loss of innocence. It actually didn't allow them to fully develop that sense of authentic self.
Hmm.
And the lack of fun and creativity in the chart, Chiron, Hygeia, and Leo, there's this aspect of trying to step into one's authentic self in the community, the collective here. Of course, they eventually got there, but it does inform us how this wound will actually eventually play out here. How there's that wound of innocence in Pisces and the Cancerian emotions, but how does that actually manifest itself? Well, then the person is going to have this complex around creativity and authentic self here, and how that looks in a group.
Well, and in the
A
40s,
little bit of that.
sometimes it was frowned upon, being creative, because that's not going to get you anywhere down the road. Artists are starving, could be, parents. And with the Hygeia between the sun and moon, it's like possibly the parents could have had different ideas of how to bring this child up.
Right. And we see, we were talking about Chiron being unconventional. I want to point out that it's in the ninth house here, which means I've always find when Chiron is in the ninth house, it's an unconventional learner. They
Hmm.
they have to learn a little bit differently than other people, and that definitely played out a little bit in this child's life.
Well, those are great examples. So you ready to go on and see what else we have here?
Yeah, I think the next slide, we just had sort of a summarization of this. If we could go to the next slide. Yeah, so really what we're talking about, and what we really want to get people thinking about is if you want to have that deeper conversation with clients about how they can, what are some of the tools they can use to heal in life, and to give you some greater understanding of the complex of what's happened with it in the child's youth. You want to look at the connection and the relationship between Chiron and Hygeia, which have a conjunction every 6 years. And there's going to be one the first 6 years of every person's birth, right after birth, postnatal. And it's within the 7 year developmental, those first 7 years of development psychologically, when we are having that cognitive development. And so there's this imprint that happens early on that we should really pay attention to it. So it gives us a broader and deeper understanding of the soul's wound and lessons in life that have to be healed.
Oh, that's wonderful. I like that. Something to certainly, look when looking at our clients' charts, to hold in the back of our minds and see how
Right.
that works for them.
So one of the reasons we're doing this now is because there's actually a conjunction this month in June. There's some recent previous ones that you put up there, right?
Yes, just so they could kind of see how they move around from Aries to Pisces, and then there was another one in Pisces, and then it go to Aries and Taurus.
Right. And I think, I know we didn't talk about this as a collective or mundane astrology perspective. Obviously, when these conjunct in the chart, it also has a collective uh, uh, wound here too, or how we're healing collectively. But I thought it was kind of important we talk today more about individual clients, because there was so much we're talking always about mundane and the collective and the community, the nation, or whatever. But I think it's important that we could look at this for individual clients.
Well, and it's interesting that on June 5th was a conjunction in Aries, and that's the same day that we had the Sun and Venus conjunct and Cazimi with the Venus star point. So, it kind of makes the Venus star point more powerful, and it makes the Hygeia Chiron conjunction more powerful because they,
Yeah.
would, feed back into each other. So I like that. And in Aries, that's about our head area. So, you know, is there a wound going on with something to do with your head? Maybe it has nothing to do with that. And it's interesting in this chart for Seattle, it's in the sixth house of health.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe, universally or collectively, they're going to come up with some new ideas of how to treat mental health, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important if anybody's listening to the show is to see where this conjunction is happening in your chart. It may be affecting your and maybe actually aspecting your natal Chiron and Hygeia in a different sign. So it's kind of important to kind of go back and look at this in your own chart.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'll have to do that. Thanks. Okay, and then we were going to look at the Sabian symbol, I believe. So, Sabian symbols are channeled from spiritualist medium Elzie Wheeler with the assistance of Mark Edmund Jones. And
So this is for that current conjunction that we're currently they're now 1 degree apart in the last week or so, but so we look at the past, present, and where it's going towards here. So this one, it can kind of represent individually, I think, the Sabian symbols of how it could play out energetically in our chart of whatever house it's in. And so, do you want me to start?
yes, please.
Okay, so the Aries 21 degrees is a pugilist enters the ring. The keynote is the release and glorification of social aggressiveness, or keyword of overwhelming power.
Yeah, and the other day I saw that an astrologer used the example of that one of a person entering the ring for a boxing tournament. And it's like, okay, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then Aries 22, the gate to the garden of all fulfilled desires, abundance made possible by human togetherness and cooperation, cosmic optimism.
And then where it's moving towards Aries 23 degrees, a pregnant woman in a light summer dress. For I can never say this word. Fecundity, produce offspring and new growth and fertility. The key word is inner fulfillment here. At the Aries 23 degrees is about inner fulfillment.
Well, that conjunction seems like it, is pretty good because it's talking about power and abundance and fulfillment. So I like that.
Yeah, I definitely think that if we kind of step back, that it could be this time when, if we want to go into the mundane or collective, that it could be where people are going to be a little bit more aggressive with right now, because that's a wound, right? The Chiron Hygeia conjunction is an aggressiveness, the pugilist. So we could see a little bit more aggressiveness in the collective right now with this. But at the same time, people recognizing that wound, and it could be a time to heal some of this anger and aggressiveness, and because that's anger and aggressiveness in the collective right now.
Well, and maybe aggressively heal the wound. It's like
Yeah,
I it's like I'm just gonna get to it and work on it, or maybe before it's been slower to heal.
right.
So it could be move a little quicker.
I think so many times we humans have a particular belief or way of what drives them, that fulfillment of what they want, and that can be aggressive sometimes. And I think we see that a little bit with these Sabian symbols.
Okay, and I have a quote here. Healing takes courage, and we all have courage, even if we have to dig a little to find it. Tori Amos. Let me see what I got next. So, any last thoughts on the
Well,
Chiron
yeah.
Hygeia?
For anybody listening to the show, I'm starting to work on a book on the astrology of healing asteroids, not just these two, but also. So, if anybody would like, wouldn't mind me looking at their charts, and because I do astrological research, I'd love to really take a look at their charts. And I'm just collecting data now and situations so I can start to build even more of a database of this conjunction, because I don't think, Liz, that anybody's talked about this. I don't think you'll find this in any articles I haven't on this cycle of Chiron Hygeia every 6 years conjunction. So
Well,
if listeners
it,
want to, just email us and then I'll take a look at your charts.
well, and it'll be interesting to look at other healing asteroids too to see how they might play in with it, and maybe they don't, but they could.
Right. Well, we'll definitely have to take a look at those.
Okay, so for upcoming episodes, Justin and I do the monthly forecast and the full moon forecast. And then the Astrology Star Sisters talk over tea. There's Saturn retrograde, reality check, summer solstice with the Cancer decans looking at astrology and tarot, and the dwarf planet series and the moon. And then Justin and I are both on Talk Cosmos monthly, and we'll be talking about the new moon, and that's on June 30th at 1 p.m. Pacific time if you want to watch a live show. And Justin and I both have YouTube channels that you could subscribe to and newsletters that you can sign up for. And then here's Justin's chart, so he can talk about this, what he's doing.
Yeah, no, I just have a few things on Instagram and also YouTube. I do a relationship podcast with Michael Bartlett out of New Mexico. He's another great astrologer, metaphysical astrologer he is. And we do this podcast on relationships.
Yeah, and it's really fun. You should check it out. And then again, here's how to get a hold of Justin and myself. Justin's website is justincrockettLZ.com, and my website is alightpath.com. And thank you for coming. Consider signing up, leaving a comment, and we look forward to seeing you again, and thank you for your support.